here we are, bright and sunny day. We're looking at whole steps and half steps in this module. These are the basic building blocks, and that's not really a pun because I'm using blocks in a actual serious literal way. Whole steps and half steps are literally the building blocks of melody and harmony in Western art music. These are how we put together scales, thus melodies, how we put together chord tones, intervals. Everything depends on these basic building blocks, how far notes are apart from each other. So we start with whole steps and half steps talking about notes that are not very far apart from each other. First, let's define the word step. A step would be a term used for notes that are adjacent to each other in the alphabet. So E to F. E to F is a step, whereas E to C is not a step. There's an extra letter in there. So that's one way to define a step, is by how it looks on the page. I could also actually define a step by using the same letter names but putting an accidental on one. It's clear that these notes don't indicate the same sound. This one is slightly different, slightly lower than this one. So I can use the same letter names with different accidentals, and I will also have described a step. Okay. Now, whole steps and half steps. Well, here I am with E flat and E. E flat means, of course, lower it a half step, go a half step below it. If I were on the piano keyboard, I would see the white note E, and the adjacent black key just below it is E flat. That's as close as we can get. The half step is the closest distance between notes that we have in Western art music. Other kinds of music use even closer than a half step, but that's what we're going to work with right now. So E to E flat, half step, can't get any closer than that. I mean, if we got any closer, we'd have the same note. It's not a step at all, it's just the same note. Okay, E flat and E. If I were to keep going down below that black key, E, E flat, keep going down, I would end up at D. Now, they're adjacent letter names, so yeah, this is a step, but it took 2 half steps to get there. This is a whole step. E to D is a whole step. So we have half steps, 2 half steps, add up to a whole step. Anytime we have adjacent keys on the piano, that's a half step. Anytime we have a key in between those 2 keys we're heading to, then that's a whole step. Okay. I'm going to go back to half steps for just a second. Hang on with me there. Let's do C and C sharp. All right. This half step, white key going to a black key, they use the same letter name with a sort of colorful shading of one of those notes. The sharp on it is like taking royal blue and just getting a different shade of blue. It's still basically blue, like going to navy blue. Still blue, but just slightly different shade. So this half step is called a chromatic half step. A chromatic half step means you use the same letter name with a chromatic alteration. All right. What if I use this letter name, but instead I go to the different letter above it? I go from C up to D, and I bring that D, lower it with flat. Now I've got D flat. They're still the same. This is the same piano key as this one. I'm talking about the same notes. There's a word for that. I'm coming back to it in a second. Now I have a diatonic half step. I've used a different letter name for each of those notes. D diatonic, D different. Chromatic half steps are the same letter name, different accidentals. I did say I would talk about the fact that C sharp and D flat describe essentially the same pitch. Later on, in more depth, in more subtle detail, we'll find out that there might be times when these don't actually sound like the same pitch. But for today, for now, for at least a couple semesters, maybe even 4 semesters, these are essentially the same pitch. We're talking about the same notes on the piano. This is called enharmonic. N-E-N means the same. Harmonic means sounds. Sounds the same. There we go. The definition tells us exactly what we're hearing. These sound the same. If we look at whole steps and half steps, then we would look first maybe at, forget all these accidentals. What if we just walk around here in nature, in my backyard, for example, and I say, well, I just came upon a D and an E. No accidentals. What kind of interval is that? Well, I could check on the piano keyboard. D, E is a whole step. There's a black key between them. In fact, there are mostly whole steps between the notes. So G to A, where's A? There's A. G to A, oh, that says A flat. G to A is a whole step. Everywhere in the adjacent non-accidental notes except two places. They're going to be whole steps except for these two places, and this is what you have to remember. Between B and C is a naturally occurring half step. Between E and F is a naturally occurring half step. Everything else is a naturally occurring whole step. If you don't put accidentals on anything else, C to D, whole step. D to E, whole step. E to F, ding, 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 half step. Naturally occurring half step. F to G, whole. G to A, whole. A to B, whole. B to C, half. That might seem kind of like trivia at the moment, but it's going to make your life so much easier because you can use that logical knowledge to figure out any whole steps and half steps. Watch this. What if instead of saying E to F, you saw E to F sharp? Well, if you know that E to F is a whole step, if you know that E to F is a naturally occurring half step, and you raise the F, now it's a whole step. Or if you had the F and you were to lower that E from E flat, it got further away. Now it's a whole step as well. So, for example, if I say to you, what's A sharp to G sharp? Let's work on that. Excuse me, spider. A sharp to G sharp. Wow, that looks yucky. It's a lot of sharps. Watch this. If they have the same accidental on them, take that accidental off and see what you get in the naturally occurring side of things. G to A is a whole step. If they both are raised by a sharp, they're still a whole step apart. They're not the same sounds. They're now a little bit higher, but they're the same relative distance to each other. If I had C sharp to D sharp, take off the accidentals. Same accidental on both notes. C sharp to D sharp, still a whole step. Wow, that's handy. Okay, what if things get a little weird though? What if I had a C flat and did I not bring out the right block? Let's improvise with the block we have here. C flat and D flat. How about that? Take off that accidental whole step. They both went down the same amount. Yeah, that's pretty handy. I should put the higher one on top, shouldn't I? It's confusing if I do that. Okay. What if I had D flat to C though? Now they don't have the same accidental. Well, go back to the original naturally occurring. Now it's a whole step. Putting the flat back on means this block got closer. The top note went closer to the bottom note. Half step. Even when things look really, really awful. Let's see if I can find... Oh, this is going to be awful. Okay. How about this one? Ooh. A double flat and G flat. So G flat's the bottom note. Well, I could still use some of that logic. Cover up the flat of the G flat. Cover up one of the double flats here. Now I have A flat to G. Do you know what that is? Yeah, that's a half step. That's a half step. Okay? Add both flats back on. We've taken the whole thing. Both ones have gone down that flat. It's still a half step. It looks terrible, but it's just a half step. So that's how you can sort of practice figuring out intervals. It gets quicker the more you do it. Just like all of the things we're doing this summer, they're meant to be done and done and done until they feel really pretty automatic, until you can just see them and know what they are. So you could practice just looking at adjacent notes and giving yourself a little quiz. C sharp to D, half step. F double sharp to G double sharp. Wow, that looks terrible, but you know what? Same accidental, whole step. B sharp to C sharp. B sharp to C sharp, naturally occurring half step. Wow. B sharp to, do I have a C double sharp on here? I have a blank space. I didn't write C double sharp. Let's pretend that says C double sharp. The C sharp was a half step. C double sharp, whole step. Got further away. So even though things look scary, they actually all go back to being really rational and easy to work out. Use the next video that's going to be practice, and use the Kahoot practice pages as well to get really good at whole steps and half steps, because the next thing we do, we use these babies to build major and minor scales.